I still remember the first time I saw him. It was a summer evening in Chicago, the kind of golden sunset that makes everything look like it's glowing. I was working as a waitress in a small diner near the train station, wearing the same faded uniform I'd been washing by hand for months. He came in wearing a white shirt and a dark suit, sharp, clean, confident. His voice was soft, but his eyes had that kind of charm that makes you forget where you are for a second. He smiled when I brought his coffee, and I swear my heart forgot to beat. That's how my story started, with a smile that later became my curse. He told me his name was Ethan Parker, a businessman who traveled a lot. He said he liked my kindness, my quiet way of listening. He said I made him feel at peace. I didn't understand much about love then. I only knew that when he looked at me, I felt seen, really seen, for the first time in my life. We started talking more. He came to the diner almost every evening. Sometimes he waited for me after my shift, offering to walk me home through the narrow streets filled with the sound of cars and the smell of fried food. I was living in a small room in a broken building. The rent was cheap because everything else was falling apart. The walls, the water pipes, the window glass. But when Ethan stepped into that world of mine, it didn't feel broken anymore. He promised me a better life. He said, "You don't deserve this. I'll take you out of this, baby." And I believed him. I really did. We got married in a small church 2 months later. I wore a second-hand white dress that a friend from work gave me. Ethan told me not to worry about anything. He said he wanted to take care of me. For a girl who came from a poor family, a family that could barely afford food, let alone dreams, that promise meant everything. For the first few months, it was heaven. He bought me clothes, took me to dinners, held my hand in public. He said he loved my innocence, the way I looked at life. He'd come home late sometimes, saying he had meetings, but I didn't question him. I trusted him more than I trusted myself. But heaven doesn't last forever. One day, it started to crack. It began with small things. A lipstick stain on his collar, a faint perfume that wasn't mine, late-night calls he'd ignore when I asked. I remember the first night I asked him about it. He was sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone, and I said quietly, "Ethan, who's calling you so late?" He looked at me like I was something disgusting on his shoe. Then he said, "You don't trust me now?" I told him I did. I just wanted to understand. He stood up, walked toward me, and before I could say another word, his hand hit my face. The sound of that slap still echoes in my head sometimes. He said, "Don't ever question me again." And that was the night I learned what fear really feels like. After that, everything changed. He stopped coming home for days. When he did, he smelled of alcohol and women's perfume. I started hearing rumors, people saying they saw him with other women, expensive cars, hotels. He didn't even try to hide it anymore. He was living a rich man's life, and I was just the wife he didn't care about anymore. When I cried, he told me to shut up. When I asked for money for food, he threw a few dollars at me and said I should be grateful he married me at all. I wanted to leave, but where would I go? My family was poor. My mother was sick. I had nowhere to run. So I stayed. I stayed and told myself maybe he'd change. Maybe the man I loved was still there somewhere under all that cruelty. But he didn't change. He got worse. One night, I tried to talk to him again. I told him softly, "Ethan, please don't do this. It's wrong. You are my husband. Please stop seeing those women." He laughed. Then he grabbed my face hard and said, "You think you can tell me what's wrong? You think you can control me?" Before I could answer, he slapped me again, harder this time, and I fell to the floor. He kicked me once, then twice. I can still feel the bruises when I close my eyes. He said, "You should thank me for letting you stay here." And then he left. He didn't come back for 3 days. I had nothing to eat. I drank water and tried to sleep so the hunger wouldn't hurt so much. I looked at my face in the mirror, swollen, tired, broken, and I didn't even recognize myself anymore. Sometimes I'd walk outside at night just to breathe. I'd look up at the sky and whisper, "God, are you watching me? Did I do something wrong? Why is this happening to me?" But the sky never answered. A month later, he brought home divorce papers. He didn't look at me when he said, "Sign it." I asked him why. He said, "Because I want to live my life, and you're not part of it anymore." I tried to hold his hand, but he pulled away like I was poison. I begged him, cried, told him I had nowhere to go. He didn't care. He said I was nothing but a burden. When I refused to sign, he slapped me again. My lips were bleeding, and I finally signed those papers. My hands were shaking, but he didn't care. He left that night and never came back. That was the day I stopped being a wife. That was the day I became invisible. People think heartbreak hurts the most, but it's not just heartbreak. It's the humiliation, the hunger, the silence. It's the way people look at you like you're the one who failed. I tried to survive. I found small jobs, cleaning, washing dishes, sometimes working late in small diners again. I tried to hold myself together. But every time I saw a couple holding hands or heard someone laugh the way I used to, it cut through me like glass. I decided to take him to court. I wanted justice. I wanted him to pay for what he did. But I didn't know how powerful he really was until then. He had lawyers, expensive ones, who made me look like a liar, like a desperate woman trying to get money. They twisted every word I said. They smiled while they destroyed me. When the judge said the case was dismissed, I couldn't even cry. I just stood there, watching my world fall apart again. Ethan walked past me without a glance, surrounded by his lawyers, laughing like I'd never existed. That night, I walked to the church and sat in the back, alone. I didn't pray for revenge. I just whispered, "God, I don't want anything. Just give me peace, please." But peace didn't come that night, only silence, and the sound of rain outside the window, the same rain that fell the day I first met him. It felt like the world was reminding me, what begins with love can end with destruction. After the court case, everything felt like a dream that had turned into a long, dark night. I walked out of that courtroom into the cold wind, holding nothing in my hands but the papers that said, "Case dismissed." The world kept moving. Cars passed by, people talked, life went on. But for me, time just stopped. I rented a small basement room behind a laundromat. It smelled of soap and mold. There was one broken lamp, a bed that squeaked every time I moved, and a window so small I could barely see the sky. But it was cheap, and it was mine. I used to sit by that little window at night and watch the lights from the street, pretending they were stars. Every night I whispered, "God, if you can hear me, please don't let me disappear." Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I worked wherever I could, cleaning offices at dawn, serving coffee during the day, washing dishes at night. My hands were always red from detergent, my feet swollen from standing too long. Sometimes I'd earn just enough to buy a loaf of bread and a little milk. Sometimes not even that. But what hurt more than hunger was the silence of being forgotten. No one called. No one cared. Ethan had moved on completely. I saw his name once on the news, attending a charity event with some model. He was smiling, wearing the same charming smile that once made me fall in love. And I was sitting in a cold basement, holding a cracked phone that never rang. I used to cry at first, then I stopped. Tears started to feel useless, like rain falling on already broken glass. I learned how to keep everything inside, how to smile when people looked at me, how to pretend I was okay. One evening, after another long day at work, I walked into a small cafe near my place. It was quiet, almost empty. I just wanted a cup of coffee, something warm, something that reminded me I was still human. The barista was a kind woman, maybe in her 50s. She looked at me and said, "You look like you've been through hell, sweetheart." I smiled weakly. Something like that. She poured the coffee and said, "Sometimes the only way out of hell is to walk straight through it." I didn't understand it then, but those words stayed with me. That night, I sat by my window, holding that paper cup, watching the city lights reflect in the rain. For the first time, I didn't cry. I just watched. And somewhere deep inside, a small voice said, "You survived." It wasn't pride, it wasn't hope, it was just the truth. I was still breathing, still standing. Ethan had taken everything from me, but he hadn't destroyed me completely. Not yet. A few weeks later, I found a steady cleaning job in a rich neighborhood. Every morning, I took the bus to the north side of the city, where the houses looked like something out of a dream. Glass walls, white marble floors, expensive cars parked outside. Sometimes I'd clean rooms that smelled like perfume and flowers, with photos of happy families on the walls. I'd wonder what it felt like to live like that, to wake up every morning without fear, without pain. But one house was different. It belonged to a woman named Claire Donovan, a writer. She was elegant, calm, and kind in a quiet way. She noticed me one morning when I was cleaning the kitchen and asked, "How long have you been working here?" I said, "Just a few weeks, ma'am." She smiled and said, "You don't have to call me ma'am. Call me Claire." She offered me tea, and we sat for a few minutes. It felt strange, sitting at a table, being spoken to like an equal. I hadn't felt that in a long time. Claire asked about my life, and I told her a little. Not everything, but enough for her to see the pain behind my eyes. She said softly, "You've been through a storm, but storms don't last forever." I wanted to believe her. God knows I did. As months passed, I began to feel a small change inside me. I started reading again, old books Claire would lend me after work. I began walking in the park on Sundays, watching people laugh, children play, couples hold hands. It still hurt sometimes, but the pain was softer now, like an old scar instead of an open wound. Sometimes I'd look at myself in the mirror and whisper, "You're still here. You didn't break." But the nights were still hard. There were times I'd lie in bed and remember Ethan's hands, not the ones that hurt me, but the ones that once held me gently. I hated that I still missed that touch, that warmth. Sometimes my body remembered things my heart wanted to forget. I'd close my eyes and whisper, "God, please forgive me for missing the man who destroyed me." That was my sin, not loving him, but still feeling him in the spaces he left behind. One night, I heard a knock on my door. It was raining outside. I opened it and found Claire standing there, holding an umbrella. She said, "I didn't want you to be alone tonight." We sat together, drinking tea. She told me about her past. Her husband had cheated on her, too, years ago. She said something that hit me deep. Some men break you to prove they're strong, but what they don't know is women like us, we heal stronger. I didn't answer. I just cried silently. That night, for the first time, I didn't feel completely alone. As weeks turned into months, I started saving a little money. I bought new clothes from thrift stores, painted my room soft blue, and placed a small candle on my window every night. I told myself it was a light for my new beginning. Sometimes I dream about Ethan, not the man he became, but the one I once loved. In my dreams, he'd stand in front of me, smiling that same first-day smile, and I'd ask, "Why did you do it?" But he never answered. He just faded away, like smoke. And every time I woke up, I whispered, maybe it's better he never answers, because maybe some pain is meant to stay unanswered, to remind us of what we've survived. Now, when I walk to work, I lift my head high. I still wear old shoes, still count every dollar, but I walk with something I didn't have before. Strength. Quiet strength. Ethan took everything from me, my pride, my dreams, my love, but he didn't take my soul. And maybe that's what survival really means. Not having a perfect life, but having the courage to keep living even when it's broken. That night, I lit my candle again, sat by my window, and whispered, "God, I don't ask for revenge anymore. I just want peace. And maybe one day, someone who will see me, really see me, not as poor, not as weak, but as someone who survived." The rain kept falling outside, soft and endless. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt something close to peace. Spring came to the city like a slow promise. The ice melted, the air softened, and the trees along the streets began to bloom again. Everywhere I went, it felt like life was starting over, except for me. Until one morning, I realized, maybe I was too. I stood in front of the mirror in my small room, sunlight slipping through the half-open curtain. For months, I had avoided mirrors. I didn't want to see the woman who had been hurt, broken, humiliated. But that morning felt different. I looked at my reflection, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't see a victim. I saw a survivor. My hair was longer now, a little messy but soft. My skin had color again. My eyes, they weren't empty anymore. They still held pain, but also something new. Quiet fire. I smiled to myself. Just a small smile, but it felt like the beginning of something. Claire noticed it too. "You're changing," she said one day as we cleaned the garden behind her house. "You walk taller now. You talk with light in your eyes again." I laughed shyly. "Maybe I'm learning to breathe again." She smiled. "That's how it starts. You breathe, then you live, then one day you fly." Those words sank deep into my soul. A few weeks later, Claire invited me to a small art gallery opening. At first, I said no. I didn't belong in places like that. But she insisted. "You need to be around beauty again," she said. "You've been surrounded by pain long enough." So I went. The gallery was filled with soft music, people talking, and the scent of paint and perfume. I wore a simple blue dress. Nothing fancy, but clean and pressed. It had been years since I dressed up for anything. I remember standing in front of a painting. A woman standing alone in a storm, her hair flying wildly, her face turned to the sky. There was something in that painting that felt like me. A man standing next to me said quietly, "It's beautiful, isn't it?" His voice startled me. Deep, calm, kind. I turned to look at him. He was tall, maybe in his late 30s, with tired eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. I nodded. "Yes, it's like she's not afraid of the storm anymore." He smiled softly. Maybe she finally realized she is the storm. His name was Daniel. He was a photographer. He didn't ask personal questions, didn't flirt, didn't try to charm me. He just talked about art, about the beauty and broken things, about how light always finds a way to enter even the darkest rooms. We talked for an hour, then another, and when I left that night, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. Someone had looked at me, not with pity, not with desire, but with understanding. I didn't tell him everything about Ethan, but I told him enough for him to know I was still healing. He never pushed, he just listened. One night, while walking by the water, he said, "You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You just have to let yourself be alive again." Those words, they stayed with me long after he said them. At first, I was scared of what I was feeling. I didn't want to fall in love again. I didn't want to trust again. Love had hurt me, destroyed me. But Daniel's presence wasn't like love. It was peace, soft, slow, patient. He'd take photos of the sunset and say, "Look how the light bends before it disappears. Even endings can be beautiful." Sometimes he'd take photos of me when I wasn't looking. I'd laugh and tell him to stop, but secretly, it made me feel seen again. For so long, I had felt invisible. Now someone saw me, the real me, not the poor girl, not the broken woman, just me. One evening, he asked if he could take my portrait for an upcoming exhibit. "I want to capture strength," he said, "not the kind you see in muscles, but the kind that comes after pain." I agreed. The photo shoot took place in his small studio. The room was filled with soft golden light and quiet music played in the background. I wore a simple white dress, my hair loose around my shoulders. He didn't tell me how to pose. He just said, "Be yourself." For a moment, I closed my eyes and let everything go. The fear, the shame, the memories. I stood there, breathing slowly, and for the first time in years, I felt like my body was mine again. He clicked the camera, once, twice. Then he said quietly, "You look like you found your soul again." When I saw the photo later, I almost cried. It wasn't perfect. My eyes were wet, my lips slightly parted, but it was real. It showed everything I had been through and everything I had become. It was the woman I never thought I'd see again. That night, after I came home, I stood by my window again, the same window where I had once cried myself to sleep. Now there was a candle burning, same as always, but the flame looked different tonight, brighter. I whispered, "Thank you, God. Not for giving me someone, but for giving me back myself." The city lights shimmered like distant stars, and I felt something deep inside me settle, a peace I hadn't known before. I knew life would never be perfect. I knew I'd still wake up some mornings missing what I lost. But now, I also knew I was strong enough to face whatever came next. Because I wasn't the same woman who once begged for love. I was the woman who learned how to live without it. And somehow, that made me feel more alive than I ever had before. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the air felt thick, like something was waiting to happen. I was walking back from the market, holding a small bag of groceries, thinking about nothing special. Then I saw him, Ethan. He was standing by a black car at the end of the street, talking on his phone. For a second, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. It had been almost 2 years since I last saw him, but that face, that familiar shape of his shoulders, that careless way he leaned against the car, it was him. My heart stopped. I froze, right there on the sidewalk, unable to move. My hands started shaking, and I felt like I was that same helpless woman again, the one who used to cry behind closed doors. But then he turned, and our eyes met. He stared at me for a moment, as if trying to remember who I was. Then his lips curved into a small, amused smile. He walked toward me, slow and confident, the same way he used to. "Well," he said when he got close, "if it isn't my sweet little wife." I didn't answer. I just looked at him. Really looked at him. He was still handsome, but there was something different now. Something colder in his eyes, like his soul had been swallowed by his own pride. There was a time those words would have broken me. Now they just made me tired. I said quietly, "I did last, without you." He laughed, that cruel laugh I used to know too well. "Don't start with your drama. You always like to play the victim." I looked at him steadily. "Victims don't survive, Ethan." I did. His smile faded just a little. He asked me to have coffee with him, said he wanted to talk. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Maybe part of me needed to close that door once and for all. We sat in a small cafe, the same kind where he used to meet his girlfriends while I starved at home. He said, "You know, I never really hated you. You just weren't enough." The words hit like small knives, but I didn't flinch. "I was enough," I said softly. "You just couldn't see it." He smirked. "Still emotional, huh? Still that poor girl begging for attention?" I leaned forward and whispered, "No, Ethan. That girl died the day you left." He looked at me for a long moment, maybe realizing something had changed, maybe realizing he no longer had any power over me. He asked, "You think you're stronger now?" "I don't think," I said quietly. "I know." I smiled, not out of arrogance, but out of peace. "I already lost you once," I said, "and that loss gave me my life back." For a moment, he said nothing. Then he stood up, threw a few bills on the table, and said, "You'll come back one day. They always do." And he walked out. I watched him leave, and with every step he took, it felt like a weight was lifting off my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't chase him. I just whispered to myself, "Goodbye." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was sad, but because I felt something powerful, a kind of freedom I'd never felt before. It was like all the ghosts inside me had finally left. I walked outside, barefoot, into the quiet street. The city was half asleep, the streetlights glowing like soft gold halos. The wind brushed against my face, cool and gentle. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was proud of it. The next morning, I went to work like usual. But something inside me had changed forever. Claire noticed. "You look peaceful," she said. I smiled. I saw him. Her eyes widened. "And?" I said goodbye. She took my hand and whispered, "Then you've won, sweetheart." That's what real victory looks like. That week, Daniel came to show me the photos from his new exhibit. One of them was mine, the portrait he took of me months ago. It hung in the center of the room, under a soft light. The title under it read, "The Woman Who Survived Herself." People stood around it, whispering, admiring. Some even had tears in their eyes. Daniel leaned in and said quietly, "You see, you've become art." I looked at the photo, my own eyes staring back at me, filled with everything I'd lived through, and I felt tears burn behind my lashes. I didn't become art. I just became real. That night, when I returned home, I lit my candle again. But this time, I didn't light it for pain or memory or loss. I lit it for freedom. The flame flickered gently in the dark, warm and alive. I knelt beside it, closed my eyes, and whispered, God, I forgive him. I forgive myself. And I thank you for not saving me when I begged, because if you had, I would have never learned how to stand on my own. The wind moved softly through the window, and the candlelight danced like a heartbeat. And somewhere deep in my chest, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace that didn't depend on anyone, not even love. The night was calm. The air outside smelled of rain and cold earth, and the city lights shimmered far away like distant memories. Inside my small room, everything was silent except for the soft flicker of a single candle. That candle had seen everything. My tears, my prayers, my loneliness, my rebirth. It had burned through my nights of fear, through hunger, through heartbreak. And tonight, it burned for something different. Peace. I knelt beside it, the floor cool beneath my knees. My hands trembled slightly, not from weakness this time, but from the weight of everything I had survived. I closed my eyes, and I began to speak, not to the world, not to the man who broke me, but to the only one who had ever truly listened. Dear God, I whispered, I'm not here to ask you for anything tonight. Not for love, not for revenge, not even for happiness. I just want to talk, like a child talks to her father after a long journey. The candlelight shimmered softly against my face, dancing with each word. I've been angry with you, I said, my voice cracking. There were nights I screamed your name and felt nothing. Nights when I begged you to make him love me again, to stop the pain, to send a miracle. But now I understand something I couldn't see before. You weren't silent because you didn't care. You were silent because you were teaching me how to stand. Tears slid down my face, but they didn't feel like sorrow anymore. They felt like cleansing. You didn't save me from the storm. You made me the storm. You made me walk through the fire so I could see what I'm made of. You took everything I thought I needed and gave me something better, myself. The words came from somewhere deep, a place even pain couldn't touch anymore. I looked at the small cross hanging on the wall. It wasn't fancy, just a wooden one I found at a thrift store months ago. But it was enough. It reminded me that faith isn't about what you see. It's about what you choose to believe even when everything else disappears. God, I whispered again, thank you for the nights that broke me, because they taught me how to rise. Thank you for the man who hurt me, because he showed me how to heal. Thank you for taking me down to nothing, because you built me back from there. I took a deep breath. The air felt light in my lungs, free. Outside, the rain began to fall again. Slow, soft drops against the window. Each sound felt like a heartbeat, like the world breathing with me. I stood up slowly and looked around my small room. The same cracked walls, the same single lamp, the same tiny window. But it didn't feel small anymore. It felt like home. Because this time, I wasn't trapped in it. I was alive in it. I walked to the mirror, the same one that once showed me a broken woman, and I smiled. My reflection smiled back, not with perfection, but with peace. I whispered one last time, if I ever forget who I am again, Remind me, God, that I am not what was done to me, I am what I survived. The, the candle flickered once, then steadied. I blew it out gently, and for the first time, the darkness didn't scare me. Because I wasn't alone anymore. I carried my own light inside me now. Outside, the rain stopped. The clouds opened just enough to let a thin ray of moonlight touch my window. And somewhere deep in my heart, I heard a voice, not loud, not human, just a whisper that said, "You are free." That night, I slept without fear, without hunger, without pain. And as I drifted off, I knew that my story wasn't a tragedy anymore. It was a testimony of a woman who lost everything and found God in the silence.